everyone. My name is Lauren Gilbert. I'm a nurse with Summit County Public Health. And I'm just going to go down the line and introduce people. Just with the mic and everything, it's easier for the cameras. This is Lauren Gearhart. She's Mountain Mentors. So she's in the Youth and Family Department under Public Health. Logan Simpson, she's part of the Youth Empowerment Society of Summit. Bree Roach, also part of Youth Empowerment Society of Summit. Courtney Brown, same, part of the YES group. Jessica Fernandez, also part of YES. We have Elizabeth Luna, and she is with the Care Clinic on the dental side. And then we have Natalia Ruiz, and she's with Mountain Mentors as well. So all of us are here tonight. We're all vested in some way in the vaping epidemic. We prepared a couple presentations tonight, but we didn't have any one that came for Spanish. So we are just going to be doing it in English, but we have a lot of people that can help answer questions. So I'm going to start with my presentation, and then I'll let the YES group speak about the youth side of things. They'll be talking about the statistics of youth use and some of the ordinances and policy changes that have occurred. And then Lauren Gearhart with Youth and Family will be speaking about a trusted adult component of this. So here's kind of my agenda for my piece of the presentation tonight. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the public health impacts. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the devices and what goes into the devices. I'll be talking about the tobacco industry's marketing tactics, the reason why people use vapes, ingredients, and some of the harms. So I'll start with the public health impacts. So as you may know, tobacco use remains the leading cause of preventable death and disease in the U.S. It has a major public health impact, but unfortunately, it's never going to get the media attention that some of the other epidemics do, such as opioids, gun violence, car accidents. Those are all things that you see in news headlines. I mean, recently with some of the vaping deaths, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we have gotten some of that media coverage, but in the past, smoking, it's the leading cause of preventable death and disease, and yet it doesn't get the attention that other epidemics do. So it causes, a lot of deaths, almost 500 million a year in the U.S., and they're more likely to, smokers are more likely to have non-communicable diseases, chronic conditions. And there's an extreme cost associated with smoking, millions of dollars in direct medical expenses and lost productivity. So this is just a kind of a graphic that's demonstrating that public health impact. So this is kind of the anatomy of a vape for those of you that may be less familiar. We basically have a rechargeable device that has a cartridge in it that's filled with the e-juice or the liquid to be vaporized. There's a coil in there that's a heating element, which heats up the e-liquid. And then I'll go into a little bit about the different types of vapes. So this is kind of the evolution of e-cigarettes, what we've seen in the past decade. It kind of started out with those Cigalikes, which you may have seen, the blue brand. Those are rechargeable, and you can get, that yellow piece would screw off and you could get a new cartridge for it. But things have just changed so much. I think there's just been a lot of advancements in technology, so they're not as popular anymore. Next, we have those vape pens, which are still pretty popular, and they have that clear cartridge, which would be filled with the e-juice. A lot of those are refillable, so people can buy their own e-juice in a container and refill that cartridge. Then we have those mods or box mods, and those are just, they're essentially the same. They just have a lot more settings on them, and sometimes you can adjust how high they heat up and stuff like that. So there's just a lot more you can do with them. They're for more advanced vapors. And then we have the Juul, which is like among the most popular vapes. So that's actually a pod vape that has pods that you buy to replace. So they're really not meant to be refillable. Next to that is called the Saurian, and that is a pod vape, but it is meant to be refilled. So people can buy their own e-juice in a bottle and refill that pod, making it maybe a little more cost effective than the Juul. And then we just have that other mod, which is super similar to the box mods. They're just, again, bigger battery and more controls. So when I'm talking about e-liquid and people being able to buy e-liquid, they're buying it in those little containers there. Yeah, and I have some samples to pass around. I actually bought a show and tell box if you guys want to see. But yeah, that's like the container that people would use to refill some of these cartridges. And it comes in like a million different flavors. I think they're up to like 7,000 different flavors. So you can really get it in any flavor you want. The industry has really capitalized on youth. And so there's a lot of flavors that are just like candy flavors. So I would say these are the two types of vapes that we're seeing among kids. I mean, I don't know what they're seeing at the school, but the impression that I get is these two styles are more popular. We're not really seeing like the box mods here with all the controls and the big battery. We're seeing these cheaper models that are like these vape pens with the refillable cartridges, or they're the pod vapes that are really popular, like the Juul and the Saurian. So this is a really surprising piece about vaping, which I've actually learned a few things about it, putting together this presentation. I wanted to know, like, how much nicotine is in a cigarette, and then what's in a pack, what's in a Juul pod, and then what's in a can of chew. So I looked up the nicotine levels, and you'll see that a Juul pod is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes.
And what pod is what someone do in what sitting, basically?
So yeah, so the question is, would someone go through a pod in one sitting? Anecdotally, kids might go through a half pod or one pod a day. That's what I've seen in some of the data that I've looked at, though I think it really varies whatever type of user you are. But I would say that's the main difference between vaping and smoking is like a lot of times smokers aren't pack-a-day smokers, but with vaping, they're getting a lot more nicotine than the average cigarette smoker, which makes it really scary. Yeah, so the price of pods for the pod vapes versus like a pack of cigarettes, that gets a little tricky. I think a pack of 4 pods is like $20, and then a pack of cigarettes is about like $5.64. But with the new tax that started January 1st, packs of cigarettes are taxed $4, which is about an 80% tax. E-cigarettes and other nicotine, like e-juice, other paraphernalia, is taxed 40%, but it has an escalator of 10% each year until it reaches parity with cigarettes, which will be around 80%.
Why do they just tax it right away? Just say it's 80%. I mean, why are they
Well,
it?
I think that
Profit? Is that what it is?
so all tax has to go to a vote of the people. And we had to kind of model what other counties have done because we wanted to kind of have a good estimate. When you propose a tax, you only really have one shot at getting that passed.
So it's per county then? It's per county tax?
It's per county.
Okay.
So a little more on the nicotine levels. This is what I learned in the past couple weeks. I was really surprised by the amount of nicotine in a Juul, more than most e-juice you can buy on the market. When you look at the package, Juul actually calculates nicotine by weight, which is really strange, whereas most other e-juice and other pods calculate nicotine by volume. So when you look at nicotine content by volume for the Juul, it's about 6%, whereas most e-juices on the market are falling in somewhere in between that 1% to like 4% range. And with youth vaping about a half pod to a full pod per day, it takes like 100 to 200 puffs to go through a pod. And one cigarette pack worth of nicotine per day for kids that are juuling, like heavy juulers, that is an insane amount of nicotine that they're consuming. So if you've never been to a vape shop, this is a picture of what it looks like in there. There's hundreds and hundreds of flavors of e-juice. And you may have heard a little bit about the Juul, like it only has 4 flavors, like tobacco, mint, mango, and I forget the 4th one. But there's companies that make pods that specifically fit into the Juul. So they say there's only 4 flavors of Juul. Well, there's not, because there's other like third-party companies making pods compatible with Juuls in any flavor. So I just say that so you know that there's more out there, and the tobacco industry is always going to adapt to the hottest trends. We have a few vape shops in Summit County. They're not dispensaries. The marijuana dispensaries do not sell tobacco products. So this is completely different, and you do have to be 21 now to make a purchase. That just happened December 20th of last year, where they raised the age to 21 federally. So there's a lot of terminology with vaping, which is why vaping is it is such a culture now, vaping. It's basically verbs for vaping, juuling, vaping, and then there's a lot of brand names that have really caught on among the community of vapers. This is kind of another cultural thing with vaping. There's something called stealth vaping. So vapes can really be made out of anything, as long as they have that. As long as they have a coil to heat up that vape juice, they have a cartridge for the juice, they have a mouthpiece. Doesn't really take much to make a vape, so the first 2 are kind of some vapes that were made, and then the last 2 pictures are kind of how kids get away with it in the school setting. So this is a bit on the marketing of the tobacco industry. So tobacco is one of the most heavily marketed, tobacco and nicotine products, one of the most heavily marketed consumer products. They spend billions of dollars a year on advertising, and unfortunately, big tobacco is really just now big vape. It's not like these are like, some of them are different companies that own vaping brands now, but a lot of the big tobacco companies are just buying up vape companies. So things have changed, kind of, but not really.
Is there any comparisons between cannabis users versus vaping users in high school? Are there more of one or the other? Is vape taking over cannabis?
Yeah, so the question is there like a comparison between cannabis users and vaping users? And it's kind of hard to answer, because THC can be vaped now, CBD can be vaped. A lot of things can actually be vaped, like alcohol can even be vaped. So I would say the majority of vapors in schools are using tobacco and nicotine. It's a super addictive substance, one of the most addictive drugs in the world. So it's a really hard habit to break.
So repeat that?
It's a really addictive substance.
The vaping thing.
Yeah, the nicotine in the vapes. So it's a really hard habit to kick. And I think the trends that we're seeing is most kids are vaping nicotine. So big tobacco has really had a history of marginalizing communities and populations, and these are just some examples I have. It's not inclusive of everything. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the old ads to the military. You might be familiar that they targeted women with Misty and Virginia Slim. They've also targeted black neighborhoods, putting more ads per capita in black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods, exclusively targeting black neighborhoods with menthol ads versus white neighborhoods. The tobacco industry has also targeted LGBTQ populations by giving their campaigning efforts, funding them, and creating special marketing tactics to specifically hook these communities. And then lastly, they're also appealing to youth. I've seen where tobacco companies have offered scholarships. They have targeted social media ads. They're sponsoring festivals, music festivals, and they just have really appealing flavors. So these are just some of the ads that represent those populations. The military, women, marketing to black neighborhoods, marketing to youth with the Juul, and then the SNUS, the Take Pride in Your Flavor, is directly marketing to the LGBTQ communities. So Altria, it owns Marlboro. It also owns this new thing called the ICOS. And this is a device that just came out where it's called Heat Not Burn. You put a full cigarette in it and it vapes the cigarette. So it's yet another device, and the tobacco industry is just diversifying their product line. And they also own Juul now. So British American Tobacco owns Pall Mall, and they also own this vape company. Imperial Brands owns Newport, and they own Blue Cigarettes, or the e-cigarettes. So I put a little bit in here about why people vape. There was a study done that analyzed, I think it was like 3 million public tweets between 2012 and then they analyzed again in 2015. And what they saw is in 2012, people started vaping to quit combustibles, combustible traditional cigarettes. But what we kind of see when people do that is it doesn't really work that well because it's not regulated, and there's no one, holding that person accountable really and monitoring that treatment. And people just typically end up using the vape and the combustibles, and then they're just like getting twice the amount of nicotine. So not to mention you have to be careful with the amount of nicotine you're consuming in the e-juice because it might be more than when you were smoking. And then in 2015, when they reanalyzed, they saw that people chose to vape mostly because of social image. So this is just the results of the study. You can see in 2012 is the blue, and 2015 is the white. So it just completely inverted. And I looked a little bit into the National Youth Tobacco Survey of why youth used e-cigarettes. And there's a lot of reasons out there. Some of it is the marketing, some of it is the social influence, some of it is family influence. There's so many reasons, and I have more reasons on the next slide. And the youth will be speaking next, so if you have questions about that, they can definitely answer what it's like to be right now in high school during a vaping epidemic. So the difference between tobacco and regular combustible cigarettes and vaping, I will say there's definitely more chemicals going into the cigarette, and there's definitive things going into the e-juice, but that's not to say it's necessarily better, because we just haven't had enough longitudinal research to know the effects of some of the things that are in the e-liquid, and I'm going to go over that in detail in a couple of slides. So what's in the e-liquid? Well, there's definitely nicotine and flavoring. And there's components of the flavoring, the artificial flavoring, that can be harmful. The way some of these ingredients are tested is usually with ingestion and not inhalation. So sometimes the FDA will approve something. They'll put it into a category called generally regarded as safe. And that's been tested for eating something, but not necessarily inhaling something, especially something that's heated up to a high degree into your lungs. So there's been some problems with some of the flavorings. There's an issue with this thing called diacetyl that caused what's called a popcorn worker's lung, and people that were stirring this diacetyl into popcorn in a factory. It was getting aerosolized. People were breathing that in, and there was some irreversible lung damage in those cases. There hasn't been a lot of evidence, though, of popcorn lung with regular vape users. In an up-to-date article I read, it did predict that cancer rates will be lower among those who smoke e-cigarettes versus traditional cigarettes, but I think that's really hard to tell without longitudinal research. And obviously, nicotine is harmful to the developing brain. So you might be wondering what the PG and the VG is, and those are solvents that, when heated up, they make the e-juice and the nicotine, they help it aerosolize, and it creates that vapor cloud that you see when people are vaping. So people that are really into vaping might have a special PG to VG ratio that they like to use if it creates a bigger cloud or a smaller cloud, and that's really why it's become such a culture. It sounds ridiculous, but it is so customizable, and I think some people get really into it, and they learn all about it, and they adjust the ratios of e-juice, and there's kind of a lot that goes into it. And then, of course, there's heavy metals that have been found in e-juice, such as nickel, tin, and lead, and we know that that's not obviously good to be inhaling into your lungs. So I already covered this a little bit, and it's hard to know really how harmful these products are going to be until we have longitudinal research. I'm sure you've heard about the vaping illnesses on the news, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So I just updated these numbers tonight. You can see we've had over 2,000 cases of associated lung injury from vape devices, and we've had 54 deaths across 27 states. It is really hard to nail down, what the cause is, but what they're seeing mostly is it's being caused by this thing called vitamin E acetate that they're putting into the THC cartridges. So majority of these users are using THC, but as you can see with the statistics, a lot of people are using THC products and nicotine products. Only 35% of those of those deaths reported exclusive use of THC. 54% reported using a nicotine-containing product, but only 13% exclusively nicotine. So vitamin E acetate is something they're putting into cartridges to really, it's called a thinning agent, so they're putting it in essentially so that they can use less THC. So they're putting in the vitamin E acetate to make it look like the cartridge is full, but really it might be half and half. I don't know exactly the ratios that they're using, but a lot of these deaths did occur in places that are putting THC into vape cartridges, like in a dispensary type setting. So they order these cartridges online with a box. It comes in like a branded box, and then they just fill it with their product. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the deaths, is this black label cartridges. So if you have any more questions, you can take them. Otherwise, I'm going to pass it off to Logan and Bree to.
Up there, the picture you showed at the vape store.
Yeah.
What percentage of those products don't have nicotine in them at all?
So there is that. I mean, he raises a good point. The question is, what percentage of products don't have nicotine in them at all? I don't know exactly how much vape stores carry with 0% nicotine, but what I do know is that there have been studies testing 0% nicotine, and they've found trace amounts sometimes, or sometimes more. I don't have the numbers on me tonight, but a lot of the times when you see 0% nicotine, there's still going to be at least trace nicotine in it, if not more. But sometimes people are vaping just the flavor. Still, I don't think it's a safe use of the device, just with everything else that can be found in e-juice.
Hey guys, my name is Logan Simpson.
And I'm Brianna Roach, and we are both members of YES, which is the Youth Empowerment Society of Summit. So YES is a CTC, Communities That Care, sponsored group that is completely youth-based, youth-run, and our focus is really just to empower youth and kind of give us the opportunity to focus on the things that we would like to focus on. And so with that, we have done various projects in collaboration with a lot of local organizations and nonprofits, and we have started an Instagram page, and we've kind of developed a central focus on things such as environmental advocacy. We do like kindness campaigns at the high school. We do mental and physical health, and then one of those things that kind of became a concern that we would have liked to address was vaping and nicotine and tobacco use. So that is how we started. So with that, we kind of created a mission. We really wanted to educate Summit County community members on the prevalence, effects, and solutions of nicotine and tobacco products. And we would really like to give insight on the youth perspective and experience. So we will be sharing a lot about what it's like to be growing up in Summit County during the vaping epidemic, what it's like to go to Summit High School when 40% of the student body vapes, and things like that. So with that being said, we would really like to encourage you to ask any questions that you have for us. We've heard it all. There's nothing that you shouldn't ask, so fire it at us. And then Lauren talked a lot about this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about the different classifications of what is vaping, what is juuling, just so we're on the same page. As Lauren said, it's kind of used as a verb. We're going to say juuling. When we say juuling, we're referring to vaping. When we say vaping, we're referring to the use of e-cigarettes, which is not THC, it is nicotine e-cigarettes with the heated coil. But then alongside vaping, there's a variety of products that are used by high schoolers that have become a problem, especially as vaping has increased. And along with that, we have a picture of some of the common flavors. Cucumber, mango, mint are the ones that we hear a lot about, and there's also all sorts of mixes and such. So every 2 years, there is a Healthy Kids Colorado survey that is administered to Summit High School and Summit Middle School students. The middle school one, all the middle schoolers take it, and then the high school one, it's like a select group that take it, or not a select group, a random group that take it to represent the student body population. And with that, we found that in 2015, 20% of the Summit High School student body admitting to using an e-cigarette in the past 30 days. And then in 2017, just 2 years later, that jumped to 40% of the student body admitting to using an e-cigarette in the past 30 days. So at the time, the state average is 25% and the national average is 13%, therefore making us 15% higher than the state average and more than 3 times the national average. So as you can see, this is a very sharp increase. 25% sounds like a lot to me. 40% is a lot. There's almost 1,000 kids at the high school. That's 400 students.
And then bringing it back to the middle school, looking at those same statistics of have you ever used an e-cigarette, 9.4% of the middle school here said yes, and the state average is 14.6%. So while that's only about a 5% difference, we really wanted to emphasize that we're coming from the perspective of high schoolers and the problem at high school and the vaping epidemic with the youth at SHS. But it's really important to recognize that it's really imperative that we start this process of education and cessation and prevention at a young age, because once you get to high school, it's kind of too late if you're already started vaping or you are vaping, and middle school is really the time where you're starting to become introduced to new things. You might become familiar with this substance, friends might start asking you, so the more that we're able to educate the parents and the students now, the more we'll be able to prevent later.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear by this that the problem is kind of starting at the high school, but not only do we have to start these education and prevention efforts early, but we have to make sure that they are significant enough to stick with that student as they get older and to stay in their mind as they move on to high school. And then as the vaping epidemic kind of happened, as vaping started increasing in the high school and in the nation, between that time that it went from 25% to 40%, there was also a rise of various other products that were being used by high schoolers. So for cigarettes, for example, it started out at 5%, and then in 2017, it jumped to 16%. So once again, part of this is because once you vape, whether you are a youth or an adult, you become 4 to 7 times more likely to use cigarettes after that. And also, once you have a nicotine addiction as a high schooler, from our experience, you're gonna start using whatever products you can get your hands on. And so we talk a lot about why do people vape? Why do people find this attractive? There's a whole movement on using vape products to help you quit smoking cigarettes. But the problem with that is that instead of helping people quit, it's actually being introduced to the youth who have never smoked cigarettes and, in fact, from personal experience, are terrified of cigarettes, but it shows up as a less scary and more accessible form.
Yeah, just kind of going back to the conversation we had right before we presented, a lot of the high schoolers and middle schoolers at this point actually get introduced to vaping when there's social gatherings or parties or something like that. You can probably ask just about any high schooler or middle schooler that's had this experience, and it's probably something like, I was with a bunch of friends and someone pulled it out and they showed me a trick that you could do with the smoke, and they offered if I wanted some and I wanted to fit in, so I said yes. That's that's how most of the stories start. And also this smoking with vaping is a really big thing. So it produces a really large cloud, and that's almost a trend kind of. So there's actually YouTube videos and stuff you can look up on how to do tricks with the smoke and stuff like that. So it's just a really big, there's vaping competitions as well with the smoking and different things that you can produce or do. And so it's just a really big movement with us, and it's less of a addiction thing and more of just I want to be cool.
And also, it's really important to note that vaping products aren't an FDA-approved cessation product to begin with. So there's really not a lot of grounds to say it helps people quit smoking cigarettes when potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially vaping products could be just as dangerous or more. Yeah.
So as you're in the trenches here, you're talking to friends in the hallways, you hear, oh, Jerry's having a vaping party. You know, his parents are out of town. Is it like that? Like,
no, the thing about vaping is it's super casual and normalized. It's not an event. It's something that you do as part of your everyday life. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we see that and how that kind of partakes in a little bit.
Yeah, how about you actually just introduce that now?
There we go. So obviously we just kind of went over the statistics. It's really easy to get lost in numbers with something like this. So we kind of wanted to walk you through like what it's actually like to go to Summit High School to experience these numbers that aren't just numbers, but are actually the story of your friends and your peers and your teammates and those that you look up to and those that you care about. So a personal story that I like to share a lot is kind of how vaping and the vaping epidemic progressed from my point of view. So I remember I was in 6th grade, I was in my math class upstairs, Miss Barry was teaching, and Mr. Shabbat walks in, and he's holding a black pen-like thing. And it's, I've never seen it before, but he walks up to us and he's like, guys, this is an e-cigarette. It was found on school property. It is very dangerous. It is very addictive. If you find someone using them, you have to report it. And at the time, I just remember, like, between DARE, between health classes, between just everyday life, we were pounded very, very hard with don't smoke cigarettes. And that was very well engraved into our brains. And so when Shabbat walked in and told us that this e-cigarette is like a cigarette, we were all just astonished. We were all terrified. We were all like, how could someone our age possibly be using this? And it was a minor problem, but I would speak from my perspective and probably for a lot of the middle schoolers. Cigarettes were scary, and something like a cigarette is equally as scary. But little did I know that over the course of the next few years, I, my peers, and those in grades above and below me would become beyond familiarized with e-cigarettes, especially as the Juul would come out. And by the time of my sophomore year, I would go to school. I'd pull up in the parking lot. I'd park in the first available spot I'd find, and I'd be parked next to a car with a student or a group of students passing around a Juul before class. Or I'd walk in and I'd go into the bathrooms and I would smell the mint mango or cucumber. I would see the clouds, or I would see a group of students passing one around. And again, people leave classes to go to the bathroom and take vape breaks. People
Vaping class.
vape in class. And I've never seen the vapeware that we passed around, but I'm sure that it exists.
no, hang on, you're saying in class, that garment you showed on her?
Well,
Doing that,
yeah, you don't necessarily need vapeware to vape in class. What's interesting about it is it's really discreet. It smells kind of like a perfume or lotion, and the cloud is pretty easy to hide. There's this thing called zeroing, and I called it ghosting, but it's called zeroing official, I don't know. And you basically make it so the cloud is less small, or there isn't a cloud, and you do it by see, this is common knowledge, it's kind of outrageous, but you do it by, you take a hit and then you kind of breathe it in enough so that by the time you exhale, it's in your lungs and it's not coming out. And then people can also sit and vape in their sleeves like this, or just if the teacher walks out of the room. And again, this isn't vaping in class, I would say it's not an every class, everyday thing. It depends who you are, what classes you're taking, and honestly, when. I would say sophomore year, vaping in class was pretty common, but with a lot of the changes that have been made recently, it's kind of decreased. But anyway, so during class and then at lunches, people take vape breaks. It's just part of it. A group of students gets up and you know what they're doing. And it's kind of escalated to the point where the school, they have a lot, they really, really care, and they put a lot of energy into trying to solve this problem. And it's just gotten to the point where it's so casualized, it's so normalized, and it used to be really accessible to the point where their efforts, their monitoring, their disciplinary actions weren't really, it didn't feel like they had a big impact. And then something that I'd also like to emphasize is vaping, especially in the past few years, is something that's not generalized. A lot of times when you take like education courses or health class or something, they talk about demographics and they talk about at-risk students, and they will say like, oh, you know, the students that don't have a lot of friends, don't play sports, things like that are more likely to vape. But it became one of those things where club leaders, IB students, soccer team captains, like athletes, like amazing students were vaping as well. And so it's like, it really wasn't something like, oh, it's a problem we need to address because the at-risk students are falling to it. It was really just kind of a wide variety of people. And it kind of felt like in every friend group there was someone that vaped. Yeah.
And probably one person knows the least of this. That's why I'm asking the question. I apologize if you guys are being bothered with this, but is there such a thing, maybe this is for the health person, is there secondhand vaping? I mean, is that like secondhand smoke? Does it exist or does it not? I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so the question was about secondhand vaping. It definitely exists, but I think the research is still, there's still a lot of longitudinal research that needs to be done to see if it's as harmful as secondhand smoke or where it falls kind of on that continuum. There definitely is chemicals that are put into the air from vape devices, but I think the research just isn't there yet to show how harmful that is in the long run. There have been some studies posted about finding like vape particles or chemicals from vape devices like indoors in certain areas, but I don't have those numbers on me, and I just think there needs to be a lot more research done on that topic.
Is this in pertain to the question?
Yeah. And another thing, like even if we don't know a lot about secondhand smoke from like the physical smoke and the chemicals, just kind of from the perspective of a high schooler, it's really, really difficult to be like seemingly constantly surrounded by vaping with no escape when it's at school, when it's at your sports, when it's at your clubs, when it's at your house, when it's with your friends. It kind of becomes something that surrounds every different aspect of your life, and that, in my mind, like even if you don't vape, that can take a toll in what I consider secondhand vaping.
Yeah, and just on top of the experiences and encountering vaping every single day, it got to the point where like if you played a sport, kids would vape before practice, during practice, after practice, at like meets and games and stuff. Athletes would like stop and take a break and like get out of the game or like out of their event when it was done and like vape in the locker rooms and then come back out. It became normalized whenever you gave someone a ride. Like a really common question is like, is it okay if I vape in your car? Before the law was changed, I turned 18 this year, and one of the things before I turned 18 was like everybody said like, oh, you're turning 18, like you can make cash, like you can start selling vaping products and jewels and stuff like that. So there was like a physical market, there was a supply and demand, and all of it was coming from the high school and trickling down into the middle school. So it's a pretty big deal.
So hang on, your friends or colleagues or whatever, students or fellow students are telling you you should sell, you'll make a lot of money to sell to younger people. They're encouraging you to do this.
Yes, I was getting a lot of encouragement from my friends to like sell and buy products, and yeah. So, and then oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I imagine it's fairly difficult to say no if so many people are vaping. So can you tell me what motivated you guys to stand up against it and how your friends and fellow students have reacted to this?
Right. So the question is, what motivated us to stand up and start this movement against vaping when it seems as though the rest of the world is kind of pushing you into vaping? And I can tell you that one of the reasons is definitely because we are part of the Youth Empowerment Society of Summit. This is a really great organization that's completely student-based. And so they basically ask you like, hey, what are you interested in? And we were kind of all sitting around and talking, and we kind of came to the conclusion that one thing we see every day that kind of quietly bothered us was how many people actually juuled and vaped. And when we had a conversation about it, it turned out that every single youth in that room had some sort of negative experience with being peer pressured into the substance, being exposed to it during like athletic events or during academic competitions or during class, some sort of experience like that. And so kind of coming together and speaking out as one youth voice and actually saying it out loud, it gave us a lot of confidence to be able to then say, okay, well, there's a problem. We're all aware that there is something, like let's do something about it. And then definitely, I think that Bree can speak for herself, but what inspired me was a lot of the kids by my junior and senior year, they would come up to me and say things like, I am addicted to vaping, I'm addicted to nicotine, I can't stop, I don't know what to do because there aren't any programs because it's illegal for me to go to someone and tell them because I'll be admitting that I'm breaking a law. I don't want to be doing this anymore. Like, can you help me? And they'd ask me to take their jewels away, but I couldn't really do that because then I would be in possession of the jewel and like, what if I got caught? And it got to the point where a couple of my friends like would break down and cry in front of me and just say like, I feel myself slipping away mentally, physically, like I'm not performing at my best. I don't know what to do about it. And so actually that happened that day, and then that night we had a meeting about vaping, and I just got really inspired because I knew that if I could change my friend's life and make it easier for her to not vape or not have the access to these products, then like how many more lives would I change that aren't coming up to us or speaking out loud?
Yeah, I mean, Logan basically said it all. I'm in the same, on the same page as her. I think that something that is easy to forget when we're standing here telling you that it seems like everyone vapes and 40% of the students admitted to vaping within the past 30 days. Something that's difficult to forget is a lot of high schoolers, especially Summit high schoolers, live very healthy lifestyles. We are student athletes, we are passionate outdoor enthusiasts. It's just part of the Summit County lifestyle. We care about our physical and mental health a lot, and I think that the school system and the community in general has done a really amazing job like in being invested in the youth and like fostering that so that we do care about our lifestyles. And because of that, like that voice of I'm addicted and I want to quit, and seeing like how it affects someone's mental health, someone's well-being overall when they're not happy with something that they can't stop themselves from doing. And so I think that was like the loudest voice that spoke to us the most. We can tell you kind of countless stories of times that really like inspired us to keep going and just help people quit. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Oh, all right. This is my favorite slide. Okay, so we've kind of talked to you a little bit about our experience, but I just want to break down the science a little bit more of like what's happening and why is this such a problem with youth? Like, why do we care about those people? They're the worst. So the brain in youth is not fully developed. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for logical decision making and reasoning. And that part of the brain won't be fully developed until age 25, and new research is even showing potentially until age 30. So while our reasoning and our logic is a little bit off right now, the part of our brain that is fully working is the amygdala. Now, this is the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse decisions and kind of adrenaline and just making those snap judgments that might not have the best reasoning behind them. And so it just makes us so much more susceptible to becoming addicted with these kind of products and nicotine, because one, you have that snap judgment of if your friends are like, hey, try this, like, it'll be super fun, I do it, like you're fine. It doesn't really take much thinking for us to just be like, okay, because we get kind of surrounded by this scenario and we want to fit in. And then on top of that, you become way, way, way more likely to be addicted, because once you get that kind of jump, your brain and your body at this point are looking for ways to find maximum stimulation with minimum effort. So if you can do that just by sitting on a couch and vaping and you get that kind of buzz and that nicotine, it's really, really easy to want to keep doing it instead of having to go for a run and getting that runner's high. All you have to do is sit there and watch your favorite show and vape, and you are feeling pretty good. So, and then also we just wanted to remind you that we've kind of already talked about this, but with the brain and the amygdala and the development of the prefrontal cortex, and then also with the physical effects of vaping, it's not just physical, it's also mental and social. And we've already touched on these things, but it's really truly an epidemic on all aspects. This isn't just because high schoolers and middle schoolers and even some elementary schoolers are starting to become unhealthy, introduced to these products, and so it's affecting them physically and their athletic performance. It's affecting their brains. You get more anxiety, you become shorter, you become angrier, your lives start to change. I've had friends who have lost friends because they've become so addicted to the nicotine and the vape products that they can't really do anything else except for vape. It's really, really hard on a society and a school as a whole, as well as the individual. And guys, this is really the point of your life where you're becoming who you are. You're becoming an adult, you're trying new things, you're trying to figure out what's going on with life, you're taking different paths and roads, and some of it's really, really hard. So if you get into these habits of unhealthy coping mechanisms, it's so easy to just slide downhill from there. So this is really more of a prevention of all aspects.
So there is a high that comes with it.
It's more of like a buzz, because nicotine is kind of a, well, there's a buzz with the
Yeah, there's a buzz.
So yeah.
And something.
How long does it last?
So the thing is, it changes as you like
addicted
grow up
or-
a tolerance for
Okay,
it.
okay.
So the first time you vape, it will be like a hit. You'll just take a small hit, and you'll feel a buzz, which is like this weird feeling of like.
Disorienting?
It's really, yeah, it's just kind of hard to describe, but like your head feels funny, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? And then as you vape more, you grow up a tolerance. And as you vape more throughout the day, you grow up a tolerance. And so there's this really great Netflix special called Broken, and it kind of like further investigates vaping in high school. And one of the things that stuck with me is for people addicted with nicotine, the like more you use it, the closer together you use it, the like less you feel. And so people that are like truly addicted to nicotine, they'll wake up in the morning and be like, I haven't used for so long because I've been sleeping, so the buzz that I'm gonna feel for my first hit is gonna be big, and they like get excited about it. And so something that I've observed between my peers is that it doesn't take a lot of like investigation to kind of learn the simple science about it. And so once you become addicted to Juuls, a lot of my friends switched to like refillable stuff where they could tinker with the nicotine levels, trying to figure out like, oh, what levels will give me the buzz that I want, and sometimes even go to stronger
And
products.
it goes for how long? Like 10 minutes? 5 minutes?
I would say shorter.
And is it enough where you'd be impaired driving? You hit where you're
Quite
driving?
possibly. There was one time I was in a car with someone and she hit a Juul and she's like, let's see if I can park while I'm buzzed. And I'm like, whoa. So it does have impairing factors. I think people kind of get used to it. It's not the extent of drunk driving at all. I would say it's impairing. I'm not sure like what science there is to back that up, but I would say yes. So kind of with that, we talked a lot about the problem, what we experienced, and now we wanted to talk about like what we did and what's kind of changing. So with that, we went to Yes, and we started talking about our experiences. We found that a lot of people had common experiences, and through that, we got introduced to a tobacco coalition, which is a public health work group. And they introduced us to an ordinance that was being drafted that would work to increase the age of purchase to 21, implement retail licensing so that in order to sell the products, you would have to have a license, and increase the price with a tax. And so we learned a lot, and what started as us just kind of sharing our perspective eventually went to us going to town council meetings and pushing this ordinance. And we went to a total of 16 town council meetings. 18 town council meetings. We spoke at Rotary, Optimist, and Universal Unitarian meetings, and we did SCTV interviews, local newspaper interviews, radio interviews, and we really just tried to get the youth voice out. We got the statistics out, the science out, and we talked about how this ordinance would help. And recently, in this last November, the ordinance passed, and the tax increase passed in the election. So things are changing now. The age has gone up, retail licensing is required, and the price has increased, and now we're kind of working on what do we do with the money from the tax to like better implement cessation prevention and education programs. And that's kind of where we are now. And then with that, we're also just kind of trying to spread the word, talk about the issue like tonight, and really just empower other like YES members and other of our peers to be involved and be supportive of them as they try to quit or as they try to navigate this. Yeah.
How old do you have to be to join the YES organization?
High school age right
High
now,
school.
but we're working on starting a middle school branch.
Okay.
So
I got 2 girls here, or 1 girl here, that's why.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
My first question is, do you have any sense why the percentage of students vaping in Summit County is so high?
Mhm.
Comparison to the rest of the
Yeah, that's a very good question. We get that a lot. The question, for those of you who couldn't hear, is why is Summit County higher than the state or the nation? I think part of it, honestly, is that we take Healthy Kids Colorado surveys that are reliable. We take them every 2 years, and they give us the statistics that maybe aren't available in other parts of the nation. I think that's a small part of it. I also think that growing up in Summit County, there is somewhat of a party culture. You know, we're a tourist town. The youth here grow up around vacationers that come, and we just grow up around that vacationer mentality of they come here, they drink, they smoke weed, they party, they ski, they just kind of live the life. And so like growing up around that is kind of part of it. And then also, we live in a very tight-knit community, and I would say that our school is very close, and just like any epidemic, it spreads. So once it's introduced, once it's trendy, it just spreads like a virus. And I think that because our school is so close and because our students are kind of united, that kind of made us more susceptible to that spread. And I think that there are a lot of factors that go into risk. In fact, we are starting a new club. It's called Uprise, and we're going to be focusing on investigating risk factors and causes. Why is Summit County higher? So that's not something that we really have an answer to now, but just some ideas.
In your perspective, is it more cannabis or is it more vaping?
Vaping.
It is.
Yeah, I would say cannabis is a problem, and I would say that it increases. I would say that a student would never just jump to doing chew or smoking cigarettes, but they might do it if they vaped first. I think that it's definitely like a stepping stone in a lot of cases.
If nobody else has any more questions, we're going to let Lauren take it away.
All right, so continuing along with the solution, I hang out with youth all the time and hopefully educate some parents from time to time as well. So that's me. Askable adults. We use Askable adults and approachable adults. We used to interchangeably. And then I've done a couple other of these talks. One moment. Sorry. And the question of the parents were, well, I would love to be an Askable adult. I want my students to ask me these questions, these tough questions, like, man, all my peers are vaping. It seems like they're vaping. Is it dangerous? But they're not asking me questions. They're not asking me at all. They're not approaching me at all. So it is important to understand that there's an Askable adult and there's an approachable adult. Both of them I feel like are made up words because they come up with the red squiggly lines every time I type them. But so starting right now, have a conversation about literally anything. If it's Snapchat, if it's anime, if it's whatever they're into, just start those conversations. And you can certainly bring up tonight's topic, but if there's not dialogue going between you and your student or you and your son or daughter, start with light topics, but keep them going. It's not like one heavy hitter conversation that you're going to have that they're going to have all the insight from you on. Start those conversations light and repeat them often. Does that make sense? Like whatever they're into, just ask them about that. Making sure that you're showing like authenticity in those dialogues or those conversations, and like true interest and caring of them. And all of these tips certainly go for any tough topic that youth go through. So it's not just vaping at this point. It is marijuana use or alcohol use, anything like that. So first of all, making sure that you understand your own values and beliefs and how you want to communicate them. Maybe it's if it's healthy over 21, because that's the law, or if it's healthy when your brain is fully developed, 25 or maybe 30. It's healthy for me, but not for you. Understanding where your values come from and where your family values can be explained. And thinking about and this is probably pretty common knowledge, but if we were to ask your youth, what do your parents think about this? Like, would they be disappointed? Making sure that that's obvious in your household. Other tips, all of these tips are very common sense, but just revisiting them and honestly tonight thinking about you having a conversation with your child, like imagining that in your brain right now. I'll give a few examples, but you guys all know these. So like I said, start light but frequent. Ask for permission to talk to them. And again, hey, do you have a moment? I just wanted to see if I can understand more about this grade or this teacher or this friend. Certainly offer concern and compassion. And a menu of options, meaning if they ask you a question about vaping, it's not just your value or your perspective or the national news perspective, but for some people you've seen this maybe. For others, this works for them. What do you think would work for you? And that might be through peer pressure or it might be through substance use. So in ways to keep them engaged with the conversation, it would be empathizing with their feelings. Again, I understand that there's probably a lot of this going around in your school, or it could be trendy on Instagram. Understanding where they're coming from could be a pretty hard place, and stressors in their adolescent and developing life bring extra stress to that, so they might be looking for those coping mechanisms. I call this the mom reaction, like the, oh my gosh, how could you? Because I got that all the time from my mom. But like as soon as it comes out, you're like, oh, I just showed a lot of judgment there. I came down pretty harsh. Definitely taking a deep breath, one moment, and then exploring that conversation with them instead of shutting that conversation down with some judgment. I just went to this vaping conversation and they said that 40% of you are vaping. I'm saying, okay, so tell me more about that. Again, keep asking for questions and checking for understanding. So you're not the one just bombarding them with facts and information and news articles, but really getting their perspective by keep asking them questions, keeping them talking. If you don't say a word, that's fine the first time. I mean, that's fine to start those conversations with. And making sure that it's not always like harping conversations, but you're celebrating their successes wherever it might be. Yes, go ahead.
Are there resources that what the ladies here said about their friends coming to them in trouble, they felt they couldn't get off of it? Are there resources for young women or men?
Yeah. Yes, the high school had, because there are more high schoolers that do vape, there are more resources coming out of the high school. There are also resources coming out of the care clinic. We have a sign-in sheet that Lauren will be passing around, and it'll be click links, I believe, with local resources. Yes. Right, exactly. Yes, with adult professionals in the community or online links, quit quit lines, excuse me. Sorry, where are we at? Oh, know when you need to walk away or reschedule. And sometimes that is like, I'm on my phone, I gotta answer this email, can we table this until after dinner? Or, I'm not really sure about this right now, I don't know how I feel about it, can you check with your feelings or your friends and come back? But understanding that sometimes that opportune moment might not be this instant. But be authentic and actually come back and revisit that conversation. And help them practice skills that reduce their stress. They're finding their coping mechanisms that aren't vaping, right? If it's deep breaths, if it's yoga, if it's going for a walk, if it's finding someone to talk to, finding a good laugh. And get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Be an Askable adult. So there's plenty of stuff that I still don't know that I get asked. But like, great question. Thanks for coming to me with that. Let's figure it out together. And again, being genuine, being authentic. Give them the information that you do know. Don't give them the information that you don't know. As you can tell, that Bree and Logan are much more aware of the situation than most of us probably are. So I wouldn't be making up information, but find out together. And again, in any sort of lifestyle or healthy behavior choice, showing them pros and cons of both, so you're not coming off as biased and you know, like, this is the right thing for them. Here are some pros, here are some cons. What do you think, like, where can we meet in the middle? It is giving them a little bit more reins, but understanding that you're the guide to walk them back to the right decision. You're not the dictator to tell them the right decision. Does that make sense? Cool. Again, I kind of alluded to this stoplight approach. This is one of my favorites when being an Askable adult. Again, that's after you've had conversations. The conversations goes two ways. They approach you with a question. It could be, you know, they're curious about vaping or something. Stop and make sure that you understand them correctly, thanking them for coming to you for the question, giving that deep breath or taking that deep breath, that pause instead of that instant reaction of judgment. How dare you? How could you? No, of course you're not allowed to go to that vaping party. They don't exist because they do it in the classroom. Sometimes. Proceed with caution, just meaning knowing what you're saying is truthful. Like, you believe it and it is truth or facts. If you don't know it, make sure that you find out or look it up together. And go forth using facts and resources. This is just a different diagram kind of showing the same thing, buying time before you jump into judgment, and then gathering more information by keep asking questions. And then always on standby. Again, for some, for others, and for you. What is the best option for you right now with your goals in the future? Is it vaping? Probably not. Again, ongoing conversations in your child's life. It's not one vape talk. It's not one sex talk. It's not one drug and alcohol talk. Start young, start simple, build from there. Build that rapport and that trust. You are not their manager at this point. You are their consultant. So understanding you're not managing each decision and each behavior that they're choosing, but you're guiding, you're consulting them. Again, 2 options, 3 options, there's several roads, there's some pluses and some minuses. How do we get you to reach your goals? And these are kind of just rephrasing. I don't think we have time to practice these, but they're kind of rephrasing instead of judgmental questions, more open-ended questions. I think one more click. And a couple more clicks, there you go. Just more open-ended without the judgment there, so you can get more information from them. Sorry, I guess that was probably not enough time to read them all, but. And then some more intervention tips too. Set expectations and clear household boundaries or rules. This isn't to say like you're still the authority in the household and making sure what your household values are clear to them. So set expectations as in, I want to meet your friends and trust those relationships. So if those are online friends, social media friends, classmates, school or sports team members, and then ask for phone numbers of parents' friends. If that jives with you, then definitely lay those expectations down and make them clear. Sorry, this was a work group meeting that we all had with youth and parents, so this is a collective resource and guide. Dialogue with them, again, conversations about their relationships with peers without the judgment, with the listening ear. Get involved, so you understand maybe who your friends are, or your students' friends are, and get involved by going on field trips, sporting events, volunteer at book clubs, or book fairs or clubs. I think this one's pretty big, providing options and experiences to find your youth's passion. So they're engaged, they have stuff to do after school on weekends. They're connected with some sort of passion and interest that they can expand on, so they do have goals for the future. Again, some intervention techniques, recognizing smells, body language, mood, eating patterns, skin color, and overall health if you do think vaping is a concern. And by body language, I think we kind of, the youth showed before, but it's so inconspicuous with just like this, if they're like kind of sucking on their thumb all day. I think they've grown out of that at this point, but maybe it's into a handheld Juul. Learn supports in the community, so mental health and understanding that there do need to be coping mechanisms in place when youth have stressful lives, going through a lot of changes. Consider your own actions and your youth perspectives. You are a role model for them, so if it's substance use of any kind, understanding that they are probably noticing your actions as well, so understanding how to role model those appropriately. Remind youth to zoom out and take a big picture of things. I know our youth are saying that they feel a lot of stress or a lot of pressure to perform well. So with that pressure, there might be some easier coping mechanisms like vaping. Understanding that if you can take a bigger picture of these stressors and maybe that one not test grade or assignment grade isn't the end of the world, but understanding that if it's having a better balanced diet or better conversations with friends, a bigger place to laugh or something is important as well. This one was great too. Designate a safe word or emoji for youth to leave high-risk situations. So someone's like, hey, there is an emergency at home, you need to come home, or that phone call. Just so if it doesn't have to be all on the youth to get out of a situation in peer pressure if there's vaping or alcohol or drug use. I think Logan came up with if it was the cactus.
Yeah, our family has a cactus emoji so we can get ourselves out of a prickly situation.
Yeah, so I think building that kind of rapport with your child and knowing that you have their back in tougher situations is going to be helpful for them. And stay positive. I know a lot of these statistics were scary, but a lot of you, since you're middle school parents, there's a lot of positives. Youth that have an Askable adult are 31% likely to use any substance. So an Askable adult, someone that they can go to and talk to. They can, have a support that is an older role model or a mentor. It can be you. It doesn't have to be you, but open yourself up to be that role. And 60% of 9th graders haven't vaped yet. So majority have not vaped once they get to high school. So let's keep those statistics high. Here are some online resources. Speak Now Colorado is great. It just more conversation starters and tricks and tips to have a conversation with. Someone brought up the Netflix series Broken. There's four very random and I don't think tied together, but one of them is Big Vape, and it is 61 minutes long, and I really recommend you watching it. I think it's a pretty reflective story of Summit County. Did you get to watch it? No. Yeah, but check it out on Netflix if you have it, or grab a friend's account and look up Big Vape.
Is that something good to watch with the kids?
For sure, yes. I would recommend watching it with them, or watching it and then asking them to watch it too, or asking them if they've seen it, having conversations about it. Mind Springs is our mental health kind of collaboration in the county. They do have support for intervention and cessation, quitting nicotine, specifically vaping. The Care Clinic has the school-based health centers in the high school and the middle school. They have behavioral health, meaning emotional health and support that can help with substance use and abuse. And they have health navigators at the clinic as well. Building Hope. Building Hope, that long website is, you can essentially go to Building Hope's website, just Google it, and you can search for each therapist based on addiction therapy. So just kind of narrow in for cessation. Colorado Quitline is helpful for youth 12 and above. Phone number, again, Google it. Nicotine replacement therapy is for 18 and above. So that is, it's used alongside with patches or nicotine substance or nicotine. Tobacco-free Colorado. SHS peers speaking to us as SMS students, as we've done tonight if your student was here, and then there should be more of that happening in the schools. And then Lauren has started a Valentine's Day take back, vape take back box, breaking up with Nick. So she will have a spot to dispense used vape products at the high school on Valentine's Day or that week. So just to show that we have other stuff going on in the community to end this vaping use. These will be available if anybody gets their name or email on a sign-in sheet right there. I think that's all. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. We all really appreciate you guys investing in how to have good conversations with your youth about tough topics like vaping. Start now. Go home and tell them where you were and why.
Thank you.
Yeah.